Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for taking your time out of your busy day to join us. I'm Ashlyn Burgett, your moderator for today's webinar, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's session on mobile app vulnerabilities found through penetration testing. This is the fourth and final installment of our Think Like a Hacker webinar series this year, and we're so excited to get started. Let's go over just a few things before we dive into our discussion today. All attendees will be muted throughout the session. This session is also being recorded, and all attendees will be receiving a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides in your inbox after the webinar is completed. Just a little bit of background about who we are before we get started. Kirkpatrick Price is a licensed CPA firm in PCI QSA, providing assurance services to clients worldwide. Our firm has over 14 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. We do offer information security services such as audits and pen testing, as well as readiness and guidance on frameworks such as SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC for cybersecurity, PCI DSS, HIPAA, HITRUST, CSF, FISMA, ISO, and GDPR. We do also encourage you to connect with us by subscribing to our blog. We publish weekly content, visiting our library of recorded webinars so you can catch up on any series at any time, including the 3 previous Think Like a Hacker webinars, and following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. We would love for you to follow us so we can connect and engage and keep in touch. I would also like to remind everyone that this presentation is provided by Kirkpatrick Price for educational and/or informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is established by viewing this presentation, so should you need legal advice, please consult with your attorney. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Stuart Rohr is a penetration tester here at Kirkpatrick Price. He has over 10 years of experience in security testing, and his specific experiences include a focus on web and mobile applications, as well as IoT devices. He holds many, many certifications that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. So welcome, Stuart. I'll go ahead and get started, or I'll go ahead and hand it over to you so you can get started.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to today's presentation. It is a matter close to my heart, one of my favorites, which is mobile devices and applications and security regarding that realm. So let's go ahead and start. Well, if I can get the slide going. And you'll have to forgive us here. There we go. A little bit of lag on my end. Anyway, today we're going to be starting with, here's our current agenda, and we're going to be talking about several issues regarding mobile applications specifically. We're not going to dive as much into devices because that's in and of itself a separate realm. And for today's conversation, again, we'll just be focusing more on the application realm, which we'll be getting into here shortly. Here is amongst our list the agendas I mentioned, and as you'll see, we're going to be focusing primarily with 5 common security issues that we find while testing mobile applications. And we'll also be talking a little bit about the background as well as some problems that are often found when performing security tests on the mobile applications. I'll be also talking a little bit about some possible solutions with each of those issues, and at the end we'll conclude and provide a summary of what we covered. So I like to start, of course, with the good stuff, you know, the benefits of mobile technology, and there are a lot. Anytime I typically have a conversation regarding the latest mobile tech, you know, it almost always ends up into a conversation about, hey, do you remember 20 years ago or 30 years ago? And so, you know, I thought of a lot of different scenarios if you were to go back that far. I can recall one where I was, you know, driving along the road, and I think it was a really cold winter night, and my tire actually burst. Thankfully, there was no injury or wreck. It was enough that I gained control of the car, and I pulled off the side of the road. You know, when I went to the back to look for my spare, I saw that it wasn't there. I can't remember why at the time, and I didn't have anything to patch the tire. It was a mess, and there were no mobile phones at that time, definitely not smartphones. I mean, there were always the old 80s brick phones, but obviously those were for a lot of people could afford them, and I wasn't one of those at the time. So on the right, you'll see a little picture of something that's become more of a thing of the past, which is a payphone. And I remember having to walk a little while in the snow to finally to get one to make a call to a car service for some help. But I think of it now and how convenient it is that, with these mobile devices and even mobile applications, you think of Uber, how things are just at your fingertip. And with a few little swipes and, finger punches, you can have so much just, come to the door, delivery from Amazon, again, an Uber, or a call to AAA. The other one I like to think about is, several years ago, before, again, these were mainstream, how many of us have been stuck in traffic? And, we're pretty much at a standstill, and maybe we're supposed to meet someone or we have an important business meeting. And, back then it was pretty much, well, I hope they'll understand. I'll try to explain when I get there. Now, and I'm not in any way advertising you to text while driving, but many people you will see will be on their phones, especially when they're standing still in traffic. And I imagine a lot of them are probably texting someone to let them know that it's going to be a while before they see them. But again, amazing that we can have that sort of instant communication with that type of device. I also think of meeting restrictions. I mean, again, in the past, you're in a meeting, you might not be able to leave, to get up, it's very important. You might have clients that you need to contact or are asking questions. Again, now with, the texting and such, which texting, of course, has been around a lot longer than, say, the smartphones. But again, just being able to have that accessibility, even, being able to do a little bit of work from your phone. I mean, there are so many benefits that mobile technology has brought us. It's tremendous. All wonderful things. And finally, this is one of my favorites. I don't know how many of you do it, but I am highly guilty of this, especially on Saturday mornings when I wake up. I don't want to get out of bed, and I just want to see the news. I want to see the weather. I want to see if it's a good running day. And instead of having to turn the TV on, because that's obviously too much work, I can now just pick up my phone, and again, in one or two swipes, it tells me the weather and, what hours allegedly it's going to rain, which never seems to be correct. And, I can check my email. I can do so much, just from that, read a book, watch a movie, and I never even have to leave the bed. 30 years ago, that wasn't a thing. You had a phone by the bed probably, but other than that, you'd have to get up and get the newspaper or, turn on the television and all those types of things. And again, when you talk about it, you are starting to see a larger problem that would make a really great talk, which is how technology is making us incredibly lazy. But at the same time, we can all say that we share in those wonderful benefits that mobile technology brings. But now let's move on to the bad, because typically with most things, you always have the good and the bad. And so with mobile, it does come with its share of problems. You have problems on all the different levels of scale. You have the physical threats, and you also have application level threats, which is what I have actually divided the presentation into. We're going to be focusing on the application level threats within this presentation, but I did want to take some time to talk about the physical threats as well, because that is a big thing. You're starting to hear more and more about BYOD, bring your own device. Personally, I call it bring your own disaster or bring your own dilemma, because they do, in fact, create so much trouble, especially for IT staff, when people are bringing in their own devices and then having to secure those in a way that makes everybody happy. And you deal with issues of, what on my phone is accessible to them, how much control do they have. IT deals with the issue of, well, how infected is their phone, and oh, please, let's hope there's nothing on there that could cause us trouble. That is definitely a real threat. And other threats that you have with the physical are also the stolen devices. It's so easy to pick up a phone and to walk away with it. There are even remote attacks, dealing with Bluetooth, such like that can become issues. And then on the application level, there are even more that we're going to cover here shortly. But again, the main problem is, as we said, while there are so many wonderful benefits to mobile technology, there are also some issues. And these issues are becoming a really big problem spot for IT staff and developers. And the question is, how can we prevent these threats? How can we thwart these potential attacks? And that's what we'll be getting into today. So one of the things that I've observed in the industry is that history repeats itself. If you give yourself enough time, as I put here, if you take a step back and observe information security over the last 2 decades, you can almost always see a pattern of recognition. And I put a little caveat, a takeaway that I thoroughly believe in, which is that those of us who ignore the past are doomed to repeat it. And I really believe that. If you go back, you'll see that there were issues in the past, say with a lot more on the software side, we'll say buffer overflows, code execution level issues. And then we moved into, say, web attacks, and they had their share of issues like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. And then as new technology comes out, I think of IoT, you start to see those same attacks reappearing, but in maybe slightly different forms. One of the things that I was watching the other day, very fascinating, was how somebody was hacking voice automated software using voice SQL injection. In the same way, we're going to see that a lot of the phones, whether they be on the device level or on the application level, have been susceptible again to, say, code execution issues, including buffer overflows and bypasses, as well as some web attacks like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. And of course, like I said, we'll get into that later, but my main takeaway here is the fact that, again, history repeats. So you would think that at some point we would start to say, okay, we know that when we're creating this wonderful new technology, let's not just focus on functionality, but also security. I think that would be the key takeaway. And that's a problem because anytime you're coming out with a new form of technology, it's almost always in a race. I recall in my early 20s when I was working on streaming video for a company. It was before some of the mainstream companies had emerged, and there was this huge race among us of who's going to get it out the quickest, who's just going to be the best. And I mean, literally, it was against the clock. I can recall many, many nights of coding. I don't even want to tell you how many hours I spent coding. It's amazing that I was able to get by with that amount of hours of sleep, or I should say lack thereof. But again, when building these new technology, whether it be software or a device, security needs to be a main focus. It should never be an afterthought. So that actually brings us into, sort of a little side note, which is if we are going to test technology, in this instance, mobile technology, what are some of the problems that we have with security testing? Mobile application penetration testing, which I usually tell people, it does require a large or high level of skill set to perform correctly because you're using so many different domains all in one. It's not where, such as in web applications, if you have a good development background and a curious mind that's able to analyze problems, a good idea of security functionality and understanding of how it works, that you can pretty much do a really good job. Or likewise on the network side, you've been a network admin for years. You're very well versed in different types of routing and network protocols. You might even have some system admin background. All of that definitely comes into play. And that really helps you to assess an environment, whether it be, again, web or network. But when it comes to mobile, it's different because you actually have to have a little bit of everything. When you're dealing with mobile applications, you are going to be dealing with different platforms, most likely either iOS or Android or both. There are some others out there that are outside of that, but those are probably the two most that I see come through. It's going to require knowledge of some networking protocols when you're analyzing the traffic between the device and the server that it's speaking with or applications. It's going to require some programming background, some operating system fundamentals, understanding how things work on that level, understanding web architecture and security testing, being able to reverse engineer the applications themselves, breaking them down. A lot of times, especially with Android, that goes into a level of assembly language. Of course, that means you're going to have to also be able to have an ability to read and examine code. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. That's one of the reasons I really enjoy mobile applications, because sometimes I get bored with just focusing on a single element. If I do so many web applications, after a while, it's kind of like, well, they're a little bit of different framework. Their pages are obviously different and things like that. There's always something slightly, unique to the application than others. But I might sit there and I think, man, I really wish I had something to reverse or something to patch and bypass, and just it's almost for me like a mystery, like a Columbo murder mystery. I don't know if any of you remember those, but that's how I see it. So whenever I get to do mobile applications, I actually get very excited because I know I'm going to be taking all these different skill sets and using them. And so that also renders into a problem, because how many people out there are going to have that skill set, or at least the diversity of skill set that they need to do that. And what we're seeing today is a lot of companies will offer mobile testing, but they'll treat it with a scanner, an automated scanner, or a person who really doesn't know what they're doing. Maybe they've done some not mobile, but web and API testing, and they think, well, that's going to be enough. And they stick them on the device, and they hit brick walls because they don't know what to do. And that's a problem. And that is becoming more and more common in the field. So if you do go down the road of asking for a security assessment penetration test on mobile technology, whether it be the device or application, please make sure that the people testing it actually have the knowledge and experience. Question them on it, question them on their background. There are now mobile certifications and courses and things, and those are all great, but I think that if you question them, especially if you have developers question them with asking development-related questions, that would probably be your best bet on trying to unearth whether or not the person really knows what they're talking about. But that is definitely a recommendation. So now we get to sort of the bread and butter of what we're talking about, and hopefully I'm not moving too quickly. But I definitely want to cover these here. And these are the 5 common security issues that I typically see when I'm assessing mobile applications. Now, remember, we're not going to deal with the mobile devices right now. That would take a whole separate presentation. Instead, we're going to focus just on the applications themselves. And I'm going to try to speak on the applications as sort of a universal thing. I know that there's differences between iOS and Android, so I'm not going to get in too deep. But I'm just going to try to do a general level overview so that you can get the gist of what's happening, and it'll give you an idea and a leg up in your conversations, whether it be with the development team or reaching out for a penetration test or just for general knowledge. So let's begin. We'll start with the insecure communications. So one of the most common issues is, in fact, the lack of secure communications between the client and server. You will see the use of clear text protocols still, and also revealing sensitive perimeters, functions. And those are really, again, sort of the tip of the iceberg, just a few of the things that we see regarding this category. And, it's almost, again, history repeating itself, because what did we see when web applications first started to deploy? After the enablement of more secure communications, we still saw people using plain text HTTP. It's a big problem because people are submitting usernames and passwords in that, and that can be sniffed on the local wire. It can be transmitted in different ways that can be captured, all things that have become big issues for security. And yet, here we go. We start with an application. My heart does go out to mobile app developers, because a lot of times they are being forced to push quickly to get these things out. And sometimes they end up taking those shortcuts, and it's those shortcuts that can often be so devastating to them. And this is one of them. And so here I actually have an example. It's of both. You can see potentially in the referrer header there that's highlighted that you're already coming from an HTTP link. Now that doesn't necessarily mean this link is going through HTTP, but in fact I see an origin of HTTPS down here. But let's say for conversation's sake that it was actually operating over, say, port 80 doing HTTP. Well, you've already got several problems. One, you have your URL here, the post URL, and it is, and there actually should be a body down here, but I don't see it. The account information right here, and then you have an amount. And this is an example of a function that's potentially being exposed. What if I, as a tester, if I was to see this, I'll tell you what I would do. I would start immediately tampering with the amount and with the account ID to see if I can access other users' accounts or alter the amount being transferred. Those are definitely items that I would play around with to see. And so that's just sort of a small, simple example of things that you would either look for in doing one of these assessments, and definitely one of the things you would hope to avoid in your development of your mobile application. And actually, let me go back one more before we continue. I do want to say that security-wise, one of the recommendations I have, of course, for the developers is, when possible, implement security pinning or certificates, actually. One of the best things that you can do is prevent a tester from being able to intercept the traffic, the communication between, from their client to the server. And pinning definitely makes that much harder. The other, of course, is making sure that you're enforcing secure communications, especially on the development side. And I know iOS specifically, when you're writing code, it gives you some additional functionality, some features that you can do to better secure your info in transit. And Android does as well. I mean, both have that ability. So that's something that when you're developing the application, I highly recommend you look at. And one of the links that I always reference is OWASP, because they have excellent resources for both web and mobile. So now we'll go into the second one, which is for information storage. And so developers, I find, will often forget that users can actually gain full access to the phone, and it's not uncommon for them to do so. You have people out there who are phone enthusiasts who literally are at the front door of their phone provider when a new phone is out, and then they take it back with them and they try to break it down and upload a custom ROM and play with the operating system and customize in every way possible. And they'll jailbreak their devices, they'll root their devices, and they'll just have at it. You also have thieves who are well-versed in this area, that when they get the phone, that's going to be the first thing that they do, to try to see how much information they could potentially extract. So it's obviously very important for you as a person to secure the device, but you also must remember as the developer that you can't trust anything that is put into the device itself, the information. Don't just assume that nobody's going to see it or that it's fine just sitting there. And some of the things that we often find either poorly placed, meaning like a really weak type of encryption or just a basic hash or even in plain text, is user session information, password hashes, and even plain text passwords, database information. I've seen the database accounts along with the password stored in a text file that was used somehow to log in. I don't really remember how it was exactly, but at the time I was somewhat shocked. Not so much anymore. And stored logs, so account sessions and activities where it actually you can pull up and see everything that a user did, especially on shopping applications. I've seen that a lot with those. But those are some things that have been found in this category. And so as a developer, again, you're going to want to make sure that you assume everything can be reached and read, and you want to enforce secure storage and make sure you're using the proper type of encryption on the information so that it's not easily broken, and you're not just doing like a basic hash that can also be revealed. Web attacks. So this is one that you might not have initially expected to see in a mobile presentation, but it is one that is actually very common. And to understand it, you have to sort of understand how mobile applications work. They sort of appear in several types of forms. I call them interesting beasts because they can be constructed as a simple application that uses the built-in browser of the device to communicate with the host server. So it's almost like a sort of a simple web app on the phone that's using the browser, and it just accesses an already online web application. It just probably formats it in a mobile view. That's probably one of the most simplistic and easy to put out apps that you'll see. There are places online that you can actually go to construct a mobile application very quickly, and that's typically what it does. Is it just does it through sort of like a little web page browser type session. But then you can move into a slightly more complex application, which sort of uses both. It still uses like that sort of web application front using the built-in browser, but it also still has some native functions. And with native functions, I'm talking about its own program calls. It might be accessing or touching functions on the phone outside of the web scope. It might even have some custom code. Maybe it's generating lottery numbers or something silly. I don't know. But, those are types of things that you're not going to necessarily find within the browser-based apps. And then you move into the more complex applications where developers have literally written it from ground up. They're relying mostly on their own native calls. And again, here I sort of put a caveat. I say mostly because the applications are still making calls based off of the libraries that are relative to the operating system it resides. But again, these are more complex. The natives, for me, a lot of times are the most fun because they're the most fun to reverse engineer and try to see what's going on inside. But regardless, when the applications do have a form of web component, which is our primary point here, they can easily find themselves vulnerable to the same types of attacks that you would see against web applications. So some of those that you might expect to see are SQL injection and cross-site scripting, CSRF, definitely the authentication, authorization issues, session management issues, anything that you would typically find within the web vector can definitely apply here. In fact, as I mentioned here, it can be the weak link that an attacker would use to compromise an associated web application. There have been many assessments when a company has come and said, this is our scope, especially when they give what I call open book scope. They pretty much just say, go at it. This is our stuff, and we start looking through the web applications, the networks and such. And let's say, on the website, I'm not finding too much, maybe some low things, but then I see in the corner that they're advertising, use our new mobile app. I download the mobile app onto the phone and start dissecting it and find that it's doing exactly, what we were seeing primarily on the web, but through a different, we'll say, entry point, and with different constraints because mobile technology is different from your typical technology. You'll find a lot of times phones, for instance, will throw a website into sort of a mobilized version, and then it'll give you the option to switch to desktop. Sometimes in doing that, you will find new injection vectors that might not have appeared on the web application and vice versa. So it's always something to look at. And again, this is something that sometimes people will miss when they're doing mobile assessments, is they don't consider the web aspect if there's a web component to the application. One of my favorites for sure is the revealed code issue, and this is quite common and very hard to defend against. Decompiling code is actually one of the first lines of attack. It is definitely mine. Whenever I get an application, it's probably the first thing I do. And when attackers do this, it helps them to get an understanding of the mechanics behind the app, as I put here, the proverbial looking under the hood. So potentially, in some instances, it could allow an attacker to actually rewrite and recompile that application's code for their own nefarious purposes. Things that I've discovered while doing this, I've seen people put in security keys and passphrases. I've seen people hard code passwords, database information, table information, essay accounts. Yes, I've seen that. I've seen revealing comments regarding code, such as, oh, this section's still not working fully. This section is flawed. We need to, improve on our input validations or something like that, and that gives me an idea to try, those types of attacks. Even hidden backdoors. I think that was probably one of the most fun discoveries I found once, and it was actually sad I felt for the company. They had hired some third-party contractors to write the code for them. They had the idea of the app. They wanted these people to write it for them, but they took the application, the finished product, and handed it over to my company at the time and had us perform the assessment. And when I was going through, I found the back door that the third-party coders had put in, that they could log in as an admin anytime they wanted. So I was happy to have uncovered that for the company that had hired us, but I definitely felt for them in having to have that fixed and all the stuff that they probably had to go through post-finding. But, those are some of the things that I have typically found when doing this regarding revealing the code. And for this, you're going to want, as a developer, to definitely obfuscate the code as best as possible. Also just try to remember that anything that is written down code-wise, just assume that it could be read. So don't put anything sensitive or secret in there. Try to be really good about protecting your information. So the last one that we'll cover is sort of following that line. It's sort of like a step up, and that's CoTampering. And this is where you'll really start to see the more advanced mobile testers come into play. If they know what they're doing and they're able to, after decompiling the application, if it gives them enough clean code, or if they're actually rewriting some of the assembly code for it, they can actually patch, rewrite, or modify the code, if you will, and do things such as bypass security mechanisms. I bypassed some of the login procedures before doing this, some of the checks and things like that, which in essence, it's like a domino effect. Sometimes you're working through, if you do this, excuse me, you can eventually get to here. It might not be the ultimate hack at first, just bypassing a certain function, but it weakens, a line of defense that enables you to launch a more advanced attack, later on down the road. And that, of course, again, would probably take another discussion, but consider that fact. Be careful about how you're coding your application and how you're doing your security checks. I always advise developers to definitely have something on their back end to double check that things are coming through correctly, that whatever function's being processed, that they're checking the information being passed through, making sure it's valid, making sure it's not tampered. Try to avoid doing the authorizations and things locally, because obviously that would be my first line of attack. If you're doing it on a back-end server, they obviously shouldn't have access to that. Therefore, they shouldn't be able to tamper with that. Those are definitely things to consider when you're dealing with this type of attack. But it is very possible, and here, of course, I showed an example of a verified purchase and, just going through some of the code to see if we can bypass that and alter the way that the application works. I will say again that CoTampering is on the higher spectrum for most people doing mobile assessments. I usually, when talking with other testers, a lot of them struggle with that because of the knowledge required to do that. That is something that if you're having your application tested, please look into having done. Make sure that the tester, again, is capable of doing that, because I can guarantee you that the attackers will, or they'll find someone who can. So that is our presentation, actually. And again, I just want to say and review that all technology such as mobile devices and applications, they all do have those wonderful benefits that we talked about. They can make our lives incredibly easier, sometimes a little too easy. I know that I have lately been suffering on the lazy side of technology, and I have to snap out of it from time to time and realize that it's not such a bad thing to get up from the bed and do something like grab the remote or open the fridge. But the trick is to learn to better secure the technology. That is the key. That's the main takeaway from this, is that in developing whatever you're developing, and of course with this, the focus on mobile, make sure security is not the afterthought. Instead, make it part of the primary objective. You want to thwart attacks before they occur. And, the thing that I typically see in our culture is we seem to be more reactive than proactive. And that is where we should change. We need to be more proactive about preventing these things before they can happen. And I think it's funny in talking about that, because here we're talking about how technology makes things easier for us to the point where we can be a little bit lazy. But to be proactive, we actually have to force ourselves to be less lazy, because it does take some extra hurdles and effort to get through. So that's something to consider. But regardless, I wanted to thank everybody for attending today. Thank you for putting up with me and our fun mishaps and lag, but I hope you really enjoyed the presentation. And if you have any information, feel free to reach out. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ashlyn.
Great. Thank you so much, Stuart. Just to let you guys know, if you are interested in being proactive instead of reactive, we do offer mobile application pen testing services here. If you're interested in learning more about those, you can visit our website or contact me or Stuart directly, and we will get you in touch with the right people. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature in the GoToWebinar toolbar. That's right on your screen, and we'll get back to you within 24 hours. Or you can email, again, Stuart directly with any questions you may have. Thank you all so much again for joining this last installment of our Think Like a Hacker series, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.